welcome to Book It. I'm Carol Anne Riddell. At just 38 years old, writer and editor Jonathan Gluck was diagnosed with an incurable form of cancer. That was more than 20 years ago. Jonathan is here with us in the studio today to talk about his remarkable journey, detailed in the memoir, An Exercise in Uncertainty. Jonathan, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
I just have to start by saying that the book is so powerful on a lot of levels, and I'm really glad to have the chance to speak with you about it.
That's kind of you to say. I appreciate that, and I'm glad to be here.
So take us back to 2002. As you explain in the book, you were leaving work and you slip on a patch of ice.
Yeah, so this was, as you say, 2002, and just a normal day otherwise, and I left my office, and it was one of those New York November days where it's sort of half raining, half sleeting, and it was just a little slippery, and I didn't even fall. I just kind of slipped a little, twisted my hip, and felt a little tweak and kept on going. And anyway, the next morning I woke up and it hurt quite a lot. And I thought to myself, well, that's a little unusual. Maybe I'm just getting a little older, or aches and pains that start to set in. But it didn't go away for many weeks. And finally I thought, okay, I've got to go see my doctor. I went and saw my doctor. He took an x-ray, didn't see anything, sent me home with a physical therapy prescription. And I went back about my life. Fast forward 10 months or so, and I realized a year had gone by since I first did this, and not only was my hip still not better, but it was actually quite a bit worse. In the meantime, my wife and I had our first child, my daughter, AJ, and she was 7 months old. This was now November of 2003. I thought to myself, that's not right, a year, and this is still hurting. So I went back to my doctor. This time he took an MRI, and this is how incredibly naive I was, and the idea that I might have something serious at all of any sort, let alone something as serious as cancer, never crossed my mind. So I get this call that Dr. Weiner wants you to come in to talk about your test results. And I was so incredibly naive, I thought, well, I can imagine that. In this day and age, a doctor is actually going to talk to me face to face about my, not send me a text or just call me. And I got there, and the minute I got there, I knew something wasn't right. When I checked in, the receptionist had a very kind of grave air about her, and she looked over her shoulder immediately at the physician's assistant, who then grabbed me and took me straight to the examining room, no waiting room. Got in the examining room, and my doctor came in, and immediately, also a tiny bit unusual, and sat down and said, I need to tell you, you have a lesion on your hip. And I didn't even know what the word meant. I said, a lesion, you mean like a tumor? And he said, yes. And I said, you telling me I have cancer? And he said, yes. And just like that, 38 years old and a 7-month-old daughter, and no family history of cancer, no particular risk factors, and I was suddenly diagnosed.
Wow, it's hard for me to even quite process, the entirety of that story. So that ultimately led to the diagnosis of multiple myeloma. Can you explain for people who may not be familiar with that, sort of what the disease is?
Yeah, I wasn't familiar with it at all myself. And in fact, one of the first, I guess, looking back on it now, you could say interesting things that I learned was how long it can take to diagnose people with a complex disease like many cancers. It took them months to settle on that diagnosis. The initial guess was that I had a form of bone cancer. It turns out I have, as you say, a type of cancer called multiple myeloma, which is either referred to as a blood cancer or a bone marrow cancer. Either way is accurate. And it's essentially a disease of your plasma cells, where the plasma cells grow at an unusual rate, an unhealthy rate, to the point where they can cause all kinds of damage. And the primary way it presents is as lesions on your bones, tumors on your bones. And that was how mine presented, as this lesion on my pelvic bone in my left hip.
And what prognosis were you initially given?
Yeah, that was a tough day. So, it takes you a while, it took me a while anyway, to work up the nerve to even ask my doctor that. And one day after I had gotten to know him a little bit, I asked him, and he said, well, you might be looking at as little as 18 months to live.
Oh my gosh.
Maybe 3 to 5 years. You're young, relatively healthy otherwise, But at that time, multiple myeloma was a very grave diagnosis with not a great prognosis. But he also said something that was remarkable, all the more so in retrospect. He said, I also want you to know, though, I realize you're probably feeling unlucky to have this at all, but I want you to know that in a certain sense you're lucky because there's a tremendous amount of research happening in this area with this very cancer, and we're seeing a lot of new drugs come in the pipeline and a lot of new forms of treatment that I really think can help you. And so if you have to have this, you actually are being diagnosed at a promising time. To be honest with you, I just thought he was kind of blowing smoke.
Yeah, I get
maybe
it.
trying to make me feel a little bit of hope, give me a little bit of hope. And as it turned out, he was exactly right. There have been a tremendous number of developments, and they're all 100% why I'm here.
I mean, 20 plus years later, it's amazing.
20 plus years.
You have described yourself as part of this growing group of people that you call cancer zombies. What do you mean by that?
Mm-hmm. Because of all these new revolutionary breakthroughs in medical treatment, there are many people living with many forms of cancer, not all forms of cancer. Unfortunately, there are some that are stubbornly resistant to any kind of progress. But there are many that now have, people diagnosed with many cancers can now live for very long periods of time. That doesn't mean they're cured in some cases, and in my case, I'm never going to be cured. What I have is not curable, but it is what they call treatable, as in we can just keep knocking it back. And that's what's been happening with me. The general pattern is I get sick, I get treated, I go into remission, I come out of remission, they treat me with something else, and so on. And that's happened now more times than I can recall exactly. But the cancer zombies idea came to me as I was writing the book because, you know, a zombie is half dead and half alive and doomed to be that way forever. A cancer zombie, or so I decided, is half sick and half well and destined to be that way forever. And it's a very strange way to live, I've realized. And there are, as you say, more and more of us because there are more and more people being treated with some of these medications and treatments. And it's just it's really a unique group in human history when you think about it with these advances.
Absolutely. You know, and it brings us to this notion of uncertainty and living with uncertainty kind of on a daily basis. You know, you talk about some fascinating research in the book that looks at the impact of stress. And all stress is hard on people, but the stress of uncertainty is uniquely hard. Can you tell us about that?
It is, and this is something I found super interesting myself. And in reporting the book, I wound up speaking with a woman who's a sociologist at the University of California, and she's made it her life's work to study this very subject. She's done some really interesting experiments with people in so-called high-stress waiting situations, like waiting for biopsy results or waiting for a bar exam result, for example. And she was telling me about this one study where they divided people into two groups and they told them they were going to receive, one group would receive a small electrical shock, you know, nothing that would really hurt, but, you know, enough to get their attention, and the other group would not. And of course, they didn't know which group was which. In any case, a large percentage of the people, I don't recall the exact number, just said, you know what, just give me the shock. I just want to have it over with. And it just, you know, indicates how much people hate uncertainty. As humans, we're really bad at dealing with uncertainty. We'd rather have the bad thing happen, just get it over with, than continue waiting.
I mean, it's hard to fathom choosing the shock, but it also makes sense, right?
Yeah.
So how do you cope with it? I mean, I know that you have a very serious fly fishing habit. So tell us, like, how have you learned to structure your life around the uncertainty?
Yeah, so this same woman, Kate Sweeney is her name, who I spoke to about this, I asked her, you know, she studies this, how does, you know, she recommend, or what has she learned about how people can best cope with, you know, anxiety in their life and uncertainty? And some of the answers were really familiar, what you might expect, you know, basic, just distracting yourself, putting your mind on something else, going for a walk, reading a book, watching a TV show, nothing revolutionary there, but it can be helpful. But the most important thing, the most helpful thing, and it's funny you mentioned fly fishing because that happens to be my thing for this, is to do something that puts you in what people call the zone or the flow state, something that's completely absorbing and requires all of your attention. And it's simple enough, that shoves all the scary thoughts out of your head because your mind is so busy and so occupied with what you're doing. Now, that doesn't have to, in my case, as I said, that's fly fishing. It can be baking, it can be yoga, it can be whatever it is for different people. But the key is to do something that's so absorbing, that you're so in the moment, that your mind doesn't have a chance to run away with all those scary thoughts.
You are really candid in the book also about the impact that a cancer diagnosis has on the people around you, on your marriage. I heard you say in an interview that it's like a bomb being thrown in your relationship. Is there a piece of advice that you have for couples?
Yeah, go easy on each other.
Yeah. I mean, wow, yes.
Give each other a lot of space, and maybe don't expect that, maybe don't assume that just because the person's maybe not behaving exactly as you hope that they have bad motives. What I mean by that is, the Hollywood version of this is, the caregiver, the person in that role is some Florence Nightingale figure who's meeting the other person's every need and there for them and loving and caring and kind. The other version, the other role in Hollywood is, the person's so deeply appreciative and so thankful and grateful for everything that the other person does. In our case anyway, that wasn't the reality. The reality was messier than that. And for a whole bunch of reasons, we had difficulty coping with all of this, and we took it out on each other.
But you found your way through it.
We found our way through it with a lot of help from friends, family members, therapists, and what we learned, I think, is to, before you assume what the other person's thinking or feeling, just ask, and then try on the other side of it to be as honest as you can in explaining, where you're at.
And you have 2 children.
We have 2 children now. We have a son also, Oscar, who is 17, and my daughter is now 22.
And how have they coped? And what a gift that, you're talking about these kids at 17 and 22 right?
Not a day goes by where I don't think about that. And one of the very first things out of my mouth when I was diagnosed, I said to my doctor, this can't be happening. It was just pure denial. I think my exact words were, no, 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 no. I think I said it 5 times. This can't be happening. I have a 7-month-old daughter, and I need to see her graduate from high school.
Right.
And not only have I now incredibly, miraculously gotten to see her do that, but we saw her graduate from college this year also.
I want to go back to, if we could, talking about multiple myeloma and the treatment. So you have gone into and out of remission multiple times over the years, right?
That's right, yes. Yeah, 7, 8, 10 times, depending on how you count exactly.
And there seems to be always sort of a new thing on the horizon, right?
Yeah. It's been literally nothing short of miraculous. I mean, I didn't even realize it myself until I put the timeline together for the book, because I had to.
Yeah.
To get my facts straight and the dates right and everything. But in many instances, some of these treatments were developed and approved by the FDA maybe 6 months, a year and a half before I needed them. So this was, as I say, honestly miraculous.
I wasn't sure I was actually going to talk about this, but I think I will. As I'm listening to you, I mentioned before when we first sat down that my father died of multiple myeloma many years ago, and he was a surgeon himself, right? So he was very aware that the options were quite limited at the time. And reading the book, I was nothing short of astonished at how much that has changed.
Yeah, well, I'm sorry for one, first and foremost.
Thank you.
And you talk about guilt, I'm sure, are familiar with the idea of survivor's guilt. And I have a lot of that when it comes to stories like this as well, not just people who were diagnosed before these treatments were available, but people who I've known who've been diagnosed since I was diagnosed who aren't with us any longer. It's a very heavy feeling, I'm sorry for all of them, and I'm try and be glad, that I have this opportunity.
Yeah. Well, yes, absolutely, as you should be. And I know a portion of the proceeds of the book are going to multiple myeloma research.
They
right?
are, yeah. I feel very passionately about that, as you might imagine.
Yes, we thank you for that,
Oh,
Jonathan.
it's my pleasure.
Well, let's switch gears before I get choked up here.
Okay.
Let's talk a little bit about the writing of the book. As I understand it, you decided to take on the project as you were approaching the 20th anniversary of your diagnosis. Is that right?
That's right, yeah. I had written a short essay about my experience 3.5 years in when I was working as an editor at New York Magazine. And that essay got a really nice response, including some book editors and literary agents approaching me to say, would you want to write a book about this? And at the time, I had said everything I had to say, basically. I didn't have any more material, so to speak. But it planted the seed in the back of my head. Anyway, somewhere around, as you say, a year or two before the 20th anniversary of my diagnosis, I realized that that anniversary was coming up. And another problem I had had all along over the years, well, by that time I had plenty of new material, more material than I hoped to have.
More than you ever wanted.
More than I ever wanted.
Yeah.
So that problem was solved. But another problem I had thought of as an author and journalist, writer and journalist, along the way was I didn't really have an ending. Most cancer stories end one of two ways. Either the person passes away or they're cured. And cancer zombie idea is sort of new and different, as I say. The in-between. But it also doesn't really lend itself to storytelling. You know, a story needs a good ending. So I realized that the 20th anniversary, even though it's a little bit arbitrary, could make for a good ending point where I could say, this is where I'm at this point in time. Luckily, I had just had the CAR T therapy and was just starting to come out of having been quite sick before that. So that made for a nice place to end it, just from a storyteller's point of view. So that's when I finally said, okay, I'm going to go ahead and try and write this book.
And yet you were told that cancer memoirs are not necessarily an easy sell.
No, I was definitely told that, and I think it's true. There is I think, very understandable belief. I felt this way myself many times when I would hear about cancer books over the years, that it's going to be depressing, or it's going to be really just so heavy and dark that you wouldn't want to read it. I like to think anyway that my book ultimately is more uplifting than depressing, and I think it's funny in spots.
It is funny in spots. Yes, it is funny in spots. And it's also, you know what else I thought? It was pragmatic in spots too. And what was interesting to me about that is that all of us can relate to the notion of uncertainty and the toll that it takes, whether you're sick or you're not sick.
Yeah.
And there was some really good, advice in there in that, I thought.
Oh, I appreciate that. It was my editor's idea, the title, to call it An Exercise in Uncertainty, and I think it was a brilliant idea.
Just a last question for you, Jonathan. I know this is something that you've talked about before, but obviously nobody wants cancer, but what would you say is the most important thing that cancer has taught you?
Yeah, so you're right. I don't like to give cancer credit for anything exactly, but I'd be lying if I said I haven't learned some valuable things. I think, one is you're stronger than you think you are. When I first heard this diagnosis, I didn't think I could handle any of it. I didn't think I could survive the next 5 minutes, let alone 5 hours or days or weeks or years. And then you find out that you can. And that we all have maybe more strength in us than we think we do. Another lesson, I think, is that really terrible things like cancer diagnoses happen, but really great things can happen too. Not for everybody, and I'm very well aware of that, as we talked about. But I remember thinking very early on, that first day, it was like the evening after my diagnosis, when I had at least calmed down a little bit. I had this very strange set of thoughts about I remember thinking, okay, there's a death force. That was my term. I don't know where I came up with that. And obviously, we all face that at some point or another, and that's out there in the universe, looking to claim us to different degrees at different times. And then I remember thinking, but there's also a life force. There's our instinct for survival and the incredible strength and power of human beings. And I just remember thinking, I really need to tap into that life force and believe in the life force. And here we are, 22 years later almost, and I've still got the opportunity to say that. So I think there's something to it.
Yeah, you sure have. Thank you so much for all this time, Jonathan. It has been really such a pleasure and such a privilege for me to be able to chat with you.
Oh, thank you. It's been my pleasure and my privilege. Thank you.
Thank you. Now we're going to head down to the podcast studio to see what Isabel Ortiz has for us in Breaking Books.
Hi everyone, and welcome to Breaking Books. I'm Isabel Ortiz, and today I have the pleasure of sitting down with author Zenda Walker to talk about her 2 children's books, Zion's Crown and Zara's Wash Day. Hi Zenda, thank you so much for being here today.
Hi Isabel, it's so nice to meet you, and thank you for having me.
No, of course. I am so happy to have you on the show today because Zion's Crown and Zara's Wash Day were really beautiful children's books, but also I feel like can speak to the adults. I know it spoke to me and it evoked a lot of emotion in me because there's such a personal feel to these books, and especially Zara's Wash Day. So I would love if you can tell me a little bit about how your personal experiences influenced the creations of these books.
Absolutely. So these books were very personal for me. They're inspired by an experience I've been having with my daughter over the years. I've been having this conversation with her about how our hairstyles and our hair texture, how it connects to a bigger story. I needed to start having deeper conversations with her because over time I noticed that she was actually having a lot of insecurities about her Afro coily hair. And it didn't matter how much I affirmed her at home, she was having those insecurities. And it was triggering for me because I too grew up in an affirming home, but also started having insecurities about my hair around the same time she did. So rather than affirming her with words like, oh, your hair is beautiful, our hair is magic, you're Black girl magic, I knew I needed to go a little bit deeper than that and share the why behind our hairstyles. And what I noticed is that once I went deeper about the why and then shared how it linked to a bigger story that we could be proud of, she started having better outcomes in school, in conflict resolution, and she was more confident.
You mentioned something how as kids you are spending more time in school and then you're going home right after, and it is really important to feel that reassurance at home, and that starts from the parents.
Absolutely.
And you see that play out in both of these books. In Zara's Wash Day, it is the tradition of washing Zara's hair, and there is some struggle with that, and in Zion's book it is the bullying at school. And both the children go back home and they're asking their parents why. And you took that as an opportunity to have it as a kind of a history lesson, which is valuable for kids and adults alike. So I wanted to know, what was really your research like going back into the history of Black hair, and what was something that maybe surprised you or you felt it was like, wow, I didn't know that and I want to include that in these books for people who also don't know?
I love this. So the conversations about hair and this ritual or kind of like regimen of doing hair at home is so significant, especially in curly coily, Afro coily communities, right? Because I thought it was I wanted to incorporate the familiarity of that kitchen salon or getting your hair done by a loved one,
Yes.
or, even in the salon, how that becomes another safe space, because your hairstylist or whoever touches your hair tends to be one of the most trusted members of your community. And that's something that is very significant in pre-colonial and African diaspora communities as well. And so what I thought was important was to encourage parents or guardians, aunties, uncles,
Your community, yeah.
the community really to know that you're kind of the first teacher to children in their most vulnerable and their developmental stages, and how important that can be. And so the history lessons, just like with my daughter Zara in real time, I realized that, giving more of an explanation about the why is very helpful for children, because just telling them your hair is beautiful or telling them that they're magic is not enough. I think taking the time to actually explain it helps children to feel safe asking more questions and helps them to be critical thinkers, and really internalize the bigger picture.
Yes.
Not just the aesthetic, right? So,
Yeah, and it also it serves as a point of pride that this hairstyle, because I know there's in Zion's crown, his cornrows are tied back to an emperor in Ethiopia.
Exactly.
And in Zara's Wash Day, the mini buns are from South Africa. So
exactly.
that was really special, because for me, I didn't know that, and it was really nice to be able to, as an adult, learn something from this book.
Right. And part of that came from Zara asking me, well, Mommy, why do you braid my hair? Why are you twist it? Why are you putting these gold cuffs and gold rings and beads in my hair? And when she hears the story of the Fulani women of West Africa, and how, it was a great identifier about who they were, the pride that they had in their aesthetic, right? And how much our hairstyles, especially in pre-colonial African times, was a great communicator about who you were, where in the world you lived, right? Where your geography was, if you were married, if you had wealth, right? If you were mourning, all these things. And with Zion, it's the same thing. I really wanted to make sure I identified leaders from our past and our present, so that young boys could understand that they could still wear their hair in braids and locks and afro and still make an impact on the world and be a leader just like the leaders of our past and present.
Yes. And something that I love, because I love a good tutorial. I love a good how-to. And you see that play out in these books towards the end. You included a how-to tutorial section on how to do both of these characters' hair. Why did you include that? And I love it. So thank you.
This is my hairstylist background kicking in. You know, I thought I really wanted to have a differentiator. Not only with the history that I included in the book, I wanted a fun story for the readers, but I also thought it would be really cool to incorporate and highlight maybe the cover style and a how-to, so that, again, another familiar point, helping parents or adult readers to understand different ways to create that style, empower them in that way, which is also why I included a glossary as well, because I thought, you know, you can write a fun story, but do you get the real meat of the story? And including the glossary gives more historical context. So all of those three elements actually help to create or set the foundation for a next step, right? Which is creating a curriculum around the book for cosmetology schools, right? With the how-tos, for history, social studies, and even science.
And I know that these two books are part of your Know Your Hairitage brand and part of your series. Is there anything else in the future that you see maybe wanting to explore under that umbrella?
Yes. So it's interesting that you asked that, because when I first wrote Zara's Wash Day, I thought it might be a one and done at first. But then as I was developing the story and I realized, oh, I can include this element of the history and the how-tos, I thought, wow, this has legs. And I realized that throughout the research and learning about all the different global communities, everyone has a heritage.
Yes.
And in so many ways, it differentiates us. There's so many things that are different about us in the global community, but there's so many things that connect us. And you'd be surprised at how the heritage thread connects so many global communities. So I plan to partner with other authors and illustrators in different communities and continue to tell those diverse heritage stories.
And collaboration is always a good thing. So I'm really excited to see what you come out with next. And speaking of what you come out with next, are you working on anything now?
Absolutely. So I am finishing up the final touches on a story that stars a Latina character.
Okay.
So I'm working on partnering with one of my best friends who is a professor of Latin studies at the University of Texas. And I really am excited about bringing this story to life. I love this story.
Okay, good. Well, I'm excited. As a Latina myself, I am very excited to read that. But yeah, I just want to say thank you so much for being here. And it really was a pleasure to talk to you about Zion's Crown and Zara's Wash Day.
Thank you so much for having me.
That wraps up another chapter for us. Thanks so much for watching. A quick reminder to download our app so you can watch on the go and check out our social media. We'd love to hear from you. I'm Carol Anne Riddell. See you next time on Book It. To support your favorite programming here at CUNY TV, please consider donating at tv.cuny.edu/donate.